Abrams. He came from Russia.
Who is he? How does he relate to us?
How does he relate to you? He's Celia Jones, Celia Abrams, your grandmother's father, and Tilly is the grandmother, and her husband.
Okay. So Celia is my grandmother, your mother.
And he came over here when he was 17 years old. He was in Russia for 15 years, or 14 years. And then he went to Argentina.
For 3 months.
For 2 years.
Okay.
And there was a rich man in France who bought a lot of land in
Rio de Janeiro.
Rio de Janeiro,
which is not Argentina.
Yeah, that's Brazil actually. Yeah.
No, that's.
It could have been Buenos Aires though.
It could have been.
Okay, well, anyway, I'll give him information later.
He's under a lot of pressure right now.
Yeah, you put me on the spot. But I have to remember, this is how
it's hard.
Anyway,
put his hands up.
So,
Put the cane away.
Jesus Christ. That stick's always getting in the way. Hey, anyway, he came over when he was 17 years old, and he came from Rio de Janeiro. I don't know where he came from.
Where in Russia
South America. And
where did he live in Russia? Where did he grow up?
Almost close to where the other ones grew.
In the Caucasus, I think.
Okay.
It was the same place that the others were.
Okay.
A little shtetl.
And when he left either Argentina or Brazil,
his father owned a restaurant, not a restaurant, a tavern, and like a hotel.
He was a rich man.
And he had a partner
For those days.
in the business. As a tavern, and the partners, one of the partners' kids wrote an autobiography. And I have a copy of that autobiography.
Nice, yeah.
And in that autobiography, he said his father and his great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, and my great-grandfather were partners. And there were 4 kids they talked about. One was 17 years old, one was 14 years old, one was 12 years old, and one was 7 years old. And the partner had a couple of kids, a bunch of kids, but the kid that was talking said he made a friend he was 10 years old, he made a friend of the 11-year-old, 12-year-old. And they did everything and they went to Hebrew school together, and they went from there with the families. The 2 families went to South America and to be farmers, and all the things they did, and the education they had, which was very little, and they knew how to daven, and they were great Hebrew, and they were religious, but I never saw signs of religion over here.
The Rothschilds, Bobby told me in the past, funded the purchase of property for Jewish people essentially escaping Eastern Europe to go and to have an opportunity to build their own life.
In South America?
So the Abrams did, and tell me the first name again? Who?
And what Rothschild did is he gave them,
No, I'm just trying to remember who our main character is.
Huh?
Which Abrams was Celia's dad? Which was his first name?
His name was Davis.
Davis Abrams.
Davis.
Okay.
It was Abramovich was the real name.
Okay, Abramovich?
Yeah, and then it became Abraham.
Davis, Abraham, Abramovich, Abrams is what it became.
Well, his real initial name was Abramovich in Eastern Europe.
Understood.
It ultimately became Abraham, and then ultimately
Abrams.
shortened to Abrams, right?
I understood that.
Okay.
And they all came to this country.
Yeah.
And Davis came over here. Over here, he told me that he was a caballero in South America, and he was chasing horses like a cowboy.
Wow.
And I looked at him and didn't believe a word he said. And I was 55 or 60 years old when somebody came and told me they came from South America and they worked for the World Bank. And I said to them, "How did you get to South America?" And she told me she was kicked out of Russia. They were kicked out of Russia, and they went to be farmers, and their family were chasing horses and rounding them up and selling them to the army, and
That
and
sounds
they
like
settled
Buenos
in.
Aires.
They settled in Brazil, and I was sitting there amazed, my tongue hanging out, my eyes bulging, because I didn't believe a word my grandfather said. He was a little guy, about 5'3",
Very big nose.
and he had big ears, and
He was 90 years old at the time.
no, and he didn't look like a cowboy to me. And I thought he was giving me the business. When I asked him about Russia, he didn't want to talk about it. He told me about being a cowboy.
Why did he leave Argentina or Brazil to go
Get
to
to
the
America.
US?
Well, his son, he told me his brothers got rid of him. He sent him to America because he was catching the old horses. They were slow.
Okay.
And that's what he told me.
So where did he go when he went to
He went
America?
to Boston. He went to
Straight to
New
Boston.
York. And I
Okay.
haven't found a piece of paper. I got papers. I haven't got the bold one
Okay.
yet.
Uh,
And
How many? Did he get married after he moved to Boston?
my grandmother told me she met him on the boat. That wasn't
Okay.
true.
The boat to the.
But because she came over when she was 18, and he was 17 when he got there. See, so
Yeah.
Oh, my mother
How many
was
kids did they have?
huh?
Yeah, my,
Five.
excuse me. My mother was older than my father, and nobody ever knew it.
Nobody.
Including
how
when he
much?
was
Shut
in
up!
grade.
Hey, that's not to be
I know
told.
you're gonna get
This
that
is-
away. Yeah, it's
How
a
by
long
how
time.
much?
4 months.
A couple of months or so. But
My
that was a
mother was
disgrace to
born in
many
a-
young people.
Yes, it's a shunda. It's a shunda. It's a shunda.
What's a shunda?
A shame.
A shame.
It's a shame on the family.
A woman doesn't marry a younger man. A woman's supposed to marry an older man.
Right.
And if you marry a young man, younger than you,
You're
you're
robbing
robbing
the
the cradle, and that's a shame.
That
It's a
Abby.
disgrace to the
Please tell that to my
family.
wife.
Huh?
Say that Abby.
Yeah.
Isn't that funny? That's true, though. Everything he said.
Continues to be true today.
And,
Yeah.
and, she,
However, my grandmother
Abby
was
should
a
be
year
ashamed.
older than
And
my
how did the man
grandfather.
feel about it?
my mother was born in 1897,
Okay.
November 26th,
In Boston?
in Boston. My,
She was one of how many?
huh?
She was one of how many kids?
I think she was born in Chelsea, by the way, but he might be right. I don't know.
In Malden.
Malden.
They all came from Malden.
Okay.
Where's Paul?
Or Maplewood is
Yeah,
better.
Maplewood,
Close,
yeah.
yeah.
How many kids?
My mother
Your
From Will's
grandmother.
family.
And your mother's family.
and my mother's family,
Yeah.
5.
Five, yeah.
There were 5.
So where did
she
Celia
was the
sit?
second oldest.
Okay. Can you name the
Rose
other
was the first.
her
And
brothers
Rose
and sisters?
was the first.
Rose.
And then there was George.
Right.
George
And then there
after
was
Celia.
Edward. And then there was Alice.
Alice is the only one I've met.
That's right.
Well,
they were all
they're all gone.
Some of them.
Yeah.
I think.
Okay.
and my
Eddie, I
mother
think
was
I
more from the
Eddie. Yes, I remember Eddie.
Nice
Eddie,
one. You know.
yeah, Eddie and Big Sadie,
Eddie's wife was
Yeah,
Sadie.
Big Sadie,
Big Sadie.
Big Sadie.
Big Sadie.
and George had Little Sadie,
Right.
and Little Sadie came from Canada,
Yeah.
and the difference is one was 5'2" or 5'1", and the other was about 5'5",
Uh-huh.
and one was a little thin girl, and the other was a little heavier,
A little horse.
and she also had a mouth that she, without like some of us. We speak before we think.
Big Sadie was a presence.
And
the
Big
time.
Sadie had a heart of gold.
Sometimes.
That was Eddie's wife.
Eddie's wife.
Who was
And
married
Little
to,
Sadie
who
was
was married
very
to Little
formal.
Sadie?
And Little Sadie was very nice, and she was she was very formal. And
Who
and
was
we used
she
to
married
call
to?
her. And every time she used to say, "God bless you."
Oh, that's very nice.
Little Sadie was "God bless you,"
And go to hell.
and
That's my
go.
question.
Who was Little Sadie married to, Bobby?
George.
George.
And,
George.
and he was a proprietor of a variety store.
Yeah, but
Did they all live together like
close together.
like the Jones family, the Zahn family lived together?
In the same house,
In the
like
same
Nan and
house.
Grandpa.
No.
No,
I don't
no,
think so.
no.
That's a good question.
When my father got married, he moved in with my grandmother, the Abrams grandmother.
Okay.
But other than that, and Georgie and Eddie lived till they got married. They lived together till they got married, and Alice lived there, and When they got married,
She
they
lives
moved
around.
out. Yeah.
She just a side story. She introduced my sister Gladys to the guy Gladys married.
Victor.
She picked him out of a crowd of people waiting to get into a theater, into a movie.
The
Right?
movie
You-
theater.
really?
She said, "This a look nice guy for you."
Was he
Gladys
one
said,
of both
"Don't."
He
She
was
says,
an
"You want to
excellent
meet him?" Gladys says, "No, I don't want you going over there and picking him up."
Right.
And
Was he-
Alice went over there and
Picked
talked
him
to
up.
him and picked him up, and he came over, and it was love at first sight. Gladys
story.
was as meticulous as anybody I ever heard, and very
Soft,
fussy. She went out with you once and your fingernails were dirty, she never looked at you again.
She was a
if your
princess.
hair wasn't combed properly,
Oh, yeah.
or it was ruffled, or your shoes weren't shined, or any incident, anything.
And the reason for that,
And Victor was
she was in
flawless.
love with my father, who was meticulous, by the way. Yeah.
Was he?
Right, Bobby?
Yeah, and he was the idol,
Because she was her idol.
and we
She-
tried to emulate him and couldn't.
Well, I didn't try.
What was life like living?
Huh?
What was life like growing up with Celia and Al?
It was great.
We,
He was the
we
boss.
were loved and taken care of like
Best they could.
we had everything we needed.
Now, he's not going to tell you the true story because none of your goddamn business.
No, I would not say that.
I would
We
not.
we had enough for everything. We didn't have a lot of anything, and there were no luxuries
It's a
really.
cleaned up story. But we were great. He's right about that. And we had no problems, even though we had nothing.
What would Greta say?
What would Greta say?
Who
Well, it all
Greta,
depends what age she was.
How would Greta answer that question?
Greta
would-
said my mother and father didn't know anything about bringing up 7 kids, and how she ever did it, she doesn't understand. And I asked a question: what book did you learn it in? What book did you bring up your kids from? And she didn't answer me. And I went home and I sat down and I was writing about my sisters and brothers. And that's what I did. And that's how I got started on the genealogy. And then I sent a whole tape to Greta,
Yeah.
and I sent and a tape recorder and a few tapes. And I gave it to her to read. I gave it to Harriet to read. And I gave it to Gladys.
And me.
And Herbie.
Yeah.
And Herbie had no comments. Greta said, it's very interesting, and I didn't know you had such a nice sense of humor.
That's right.
And Gladys said, I didn't talk about my mother enough, and I only
That's
talked
true.
about
She
my
forgot
father,
about that. Right.
and because I thought my father,
Ask a question.
huh?
Can I ask a
Go
question?
ahead.
Tell me what your father was like in 1 minute.
Fantastic.
My
Each-
father
each
was,
of you, 1 minute.
Shut up and let me tell it.
Okay.
My father was a soft-spoken, gentle man. I would not, if I was a stranger, I would not want to fight with him or start with him because he was a tough hombre. I mean, but on the whole, in our house, he never raised his voice. My mother did it, and he never had a reprimand to anybody but Herbie, and Herbie got him mad one day, and he told him to do something, and Herbie laughed.
Can I tell that story?
Yeah, you can tell the
Okay,
story.
that's a nice story. My father, the door opened. He could be banging my head against the wall. The door opened. My father was coming in. The whole house got quiet. He was like a king. He never learned how to open up the refrigerator door. It was impossible to expect him to do anything like that. You know, he went out, he worked every day, he did looked for a job every day, worked nights, he did whatever he could to support the family, right?
And my mother treated him like a king.
And he was a king. And he
And the
went out,
kids
he got
did too.
dressed up every day, white shirt and tie that my mother ironed and did all that stuff. He looked like he was a millionaire. And he acted like he was a millionaire. He didn't act like a tough guy. He happened to know a bunch of tough guys, okay? And nobody bothered him because he was an athlete. My father was a good athlete from what I heard, right?
And he was also a boxer.
Yeah, he was a boxer. And he came from the West End, which is a very tough neighborhood, right, Bobby?
Yeah, they moved there from Haverhill.
Okay. And he was well respected in the community. He was so well respected that they used to use him as a front man to go into businesses. and you know, because they used to go under with his name because.